everyone. My name is Emily Obenauer. I am the Global Director of Product Marketing at Sitetracker, and it is such a pleasure to be here on the RE Plus stage, especially the Electric Drive stage. I was here 2 years ago in Vegas. Very pleased to be back with you guys. So today I want to talk about something that doesn't really make the headlines, but it does quietly determine who succeeds and who struggles when it comes to EV infrastructure. It's complexity. So it's not the technology itself, it's not chargers, it's not batteries, it's not software even, but it's the messy web of people, processes, and data that either accelerates rollouts or tends to grind them to a complete halt. So over the next 20 to 25 minutes, I want to go beneath the surface, unpack the EV life cycle from end to end, and look at the hidden cost of complexity. I also want to share a couple of proven ways that you can tame it through a playbook, a very clear playbook, and share some real-world success stories from a couple of our customers that you can all apply in your own organizations. So, again today, we're going to go beneath the surface. We're going to look at the hidden risk of complexity. We're going to go through that charger life cycle from deployment through operations. We're going to highlight where that complexity tends to creep in. We're going to share this 3-move playbook on how to tame complexity. And then we'll explore some of those real-world examples from leaders in EV charging. And then lastly, we'll talk about why it's so critical to act now and what you can do today for your own organization. So a little context for the conversation today. A quick word about myself and about Sitetracker. So for myself, I've been in the clean energy space, and actually I would back that up and say the energy space for nearly 20 years now. I've worked with and for everyone from utilities to industry associations, OEMs, sustainability consultancies, and beyond in that time. A little more about Sitetracker, just to kind of set the tone as to why we have the credibility to be speaking on this. We are one complete solution to plan, build, operate, and maintain networks, depots, and charge points, among other critical infrastructure. And we partner with nearly 400 customers globally, including developers, owners, operators, and contractors in this space, really across EV charging, but also the clean energy transition as a whole, digital infrastructure, data centers, and beyond. Think critical infrastructure as a whole. We're really proud to be a top complete asset lifecycle management solution in the industry, and we're trusted again by leaders across those various spaces. We do have a nearly 100% retention rate of our customers, and more than that, we tend to see an average expansion rate of about 2x within the first 2 years. So why do I say all of the sales pitch up front? It's because I want you to recognize that we don't just acquire new logos, we really acquire new partners, and we help grow with them over time. Their success is our success. My vantage point, and the vantage point I bring from Sitetracker, is really to see across the entire value chain of EV charging. So not just development, not just long-term asset management, but across the entire thing, including construction and operations and maintenance out in the fields as well. And that really leads me to be able to say that, what we see again and again from our customers who are out in the space day to day is that the invisible risk, again, isn't charger hardware. It's that tangled process, it's the siloed data, and it's misaligned stakeholders that can really make or break rollouts. So let's go ahead and dive into the content and look a little bit beneath the surface for challenges that I'm sure many of you that are working in the space in the audience today are also dealing with. So when we ask people, when we ask customers what challenges they're facing in the EV charging space, we tend to hear the same list of things over and over again. And I'm sure, again, these are things that you all might be dealing with today. Things like project delays, missed go-live dates, outages, customer complaints, blown budgets, lost incentive windows, very relevant right now. These are all the very visible symptoms that we're seeing on a day-to-day, on a week-to-week, on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter basis, right? But what's behind them, right? It's not just bad luck. It's hidden complexity. It's fragmented tools, right? Like spreadsheets and emails that we're all working out of and that we have our own unique version of that might look a little different than our colleagues. It's siloed teams that don't share data, whether you're talking about within the same department or potentially across departments, maybe Your asset managers are looking at something very different than what your development managers are looking at, even if some of the information they're working with needs to be passed along. It's permitting bottlenecks, right? I know that's one we can all definitely relate to, the permitting bottlenecks that are causing issues, and no ability to be able to impact how certain delays at one project might affect other projects within your overall portfolio. It's manual error-prone processes, and it's the absence of a repeatable playbook, of that standardized way of operating and doing business. So ultimately, think of it like an iceberg, right? Above the surface are those missed deadlines, it's the unhappy stakeholders, the things that we see visibly that make none of us happy. But beneath that lies that tangled mess of people, of processes, of data issues. And unless we tackle that bottom bit of the iceberg, the symptoms will just continue to keep reoccurring no matter how much new hardware, how many new charging sites, right, we roll out. And complexity, of course, is not just frustrating, right? It has real bottom line impact to our business. It's expensive. It quietly slows your time to market, which in EV charging, of course, is incredibly critical. Every week a site isn't live, that's lost revenue. And also, it jeopardizes customer trust. Drivers expect chargers to be reliable. We all know that. We've all heard the stories of a person going up using a particular charging station. It doesn't work once. They switch over to something else, find it works. It can be difficult to win that trust back. If uptime suffers, adoption suffers. And then finally, right, the complexity erodes investor confidence. So this market is an incredibly capital-heavy, capital-intensive industry. And investors ultimately want predictable outcomes. If complexity creates delays, if it creates rework, the unexpected costs and predictability vanishes altogether, and investors start to get a little bit worried. So the invisible risk of complexity is actually one of the biggest business risks in EV charging today. So let's ground this conversation a little bit in reality of what we're all experiencing across that life cycle. So this is our diagram that shows the traditional end-to-end EV charging life cycle, starting with funding, site identification, moving through permitting, design, construction, and extends all the way to operations and maintenance and long-term asset management. This is not, of course, a linear process, especially those last two are incredibly ongoing. Now, another thing I would note, of course, is if this does not look exactly like your own process, that makes sense. Everyone is going to have a slightly different skew of what this looks like, depending on the geography that you work in or your individual business, but this at the highest level is what you might see. Now, across this life cycle, we tend to see challenges like large disconnected tech stacks, right? Again, that idea that everyone's using their own type of tool within their department, or even individually, we have super users of certain types of tools, right? It's unorganized documentation, right? Not understanding what the latest version is, where to get it, how to access it, who owns it, and oh gosh, if I mess up one cell in this Excel spreadsheet, the whole operation is just messed up. Non-standardized processes, manual reporting, and so much more, right? These are the common challenges that we're seeing across our customers today. At this stage, or across all stages, I should say, you have multiple stakeholders, so that could be regulators, it could be utilities, contractors, OEMs, finance teams, operations teams, you name it, right? Lots of different types of stakeholders. And each stage also has its own data, its own documents, and its own approvals. So when this life cycle works smoothly, when you can go step by step through this, you can scale really quickly. You can start with a small portfolio and ramp up that really fast. But every handoff between every team and every individual, so whether it's between development and construction or construction to operations, that's a potential failure point. If the process isn't standardized, if the data isn't centralized, that's where complexity ultimately really accumulates. So, excuse me. So what do we do about it, right? I've set up all of these things that you already know, right? I know I'm very much preaching to the choir here at RE+, and with this audience in particular. What I would encourage you to think of as a very simple 3-step playbook that can get you there. Now, When I say simple playbook, yes, I'm laying this out on a slide and 3 easy things. Of course, it's more complex in terms of implementing that, but really it does come down to these 3 core areas. So 1, centralizing. Bring your data teams and processes into one single source of truth. No more are each department, each team member going to be capturing the way they do work across multiple tools. Standardize, create repeatable playbooks so that every project doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Project manager A is not managing their siting and permitting and all of that in one particular way in one system, and project manager B is doing it in a very different way. Everyone is doing this in the same standardized way, which ultimately breeds massive efficiency in terms of how you're doing work. And this doesn't just have to be on the planning end of things, right? You could also apply this same thinking to the operations and maintenance fields, for example, right? Having a very standardized checklist of ways of doing things out in the field certainly helps, not only for internal teams, but for external teams as well, especially in such a contractor-dependent industry like EV charging. Really important to make sure that everyone is singing off the same song sheet if they're working within your book of business. Not to mention new hires as well, right? That ramp time. So not just having legacy employees start to do things in one common way, but when you think about onboarding and training new resources to come into your organization, being able to ramp them quickly and understand how you operate is so incredibly important. And last one, optimize. So what I have here is basically saying that your ability to use data and visibility to streamline handoffs, predict issues, and maximize returns. What I would say more specifically about that is, as you have centralized all of your information, your people, your processes, your data, as you have standardized the way in which you work, what you start to see as you move up the maturity model is that you have to optimize that, right? So you're going to learn that the V1 version of how you did business doesn't necessarily work as you continue to mature as an organization, right? You can continue to optimize that, and having a system that allows you to do that allows not just one project manager or operations lead or you insert title, it applies, but that everyone benefits from this kind of closed loop learning on how to optimize our processes internally. Really important that we can do that. So this approach, we believe, really turns a chaotic way of doing business into some order. And more importantly, it's not just that one-time fix, right? It's not one moment in time, one particular fiscal quarter, one particular fiscal year where you have some aggressive growth goals. This is something that is a scalable framework that ultimately can apply across your portfolios or geographies depending on where you work. Okay, so this is probably what you're most interested in, right? Like, give me some case studies. Tell me where this has worked, this very simple framework has worked for others. So let me talk about our playbook in action. I'm gonna share a couple of examples. I'll root them in some key challenges that both of these customers were experiencing, which I will just say are both very common challenges we see across customers in this space. The first is gonna be one of the top 3 CPOs here in the US. They struggled with things like spreadsheets, siloed data, and limited portfolio visibility. And then the next one is going to be an example from one of Europe's largest utilities who was entering into the EV charging space for the first time, and they faced things like project delays due to manual reporting and inventory issues. All right, so on this slide, I want to talk about one of the most universal challenges that we see across our customer base, the idea of doing more with less. And this is coming from the US top 3 charge point operator. So whether it's clean energy or EV charging, fiber, utilities, you name it, right? We can all identify with that struggle of having to do more with less. Teams are under pressure to scale, but resources aren't scaling at the same rate. So that mismatch, that scalability gap that we're all very acutely aware of and dealing with, that creates real obstacles, right? One of the top 3 US EV CPOs had an incredibly ambitious goal ahead of them. They were looking to expand from hundreds of thousands of charging sites to millions of sites globally just within a couple of year period. At the same time, they were trying to win contracts to electrify entire shipping and delivery fleets. So the growth opportunities were incredibly massive, right? They were right in front of them, they were ripe for the taking, they were the ones to win, and people were excited. But their operations just weren't set up to handle it. And their executive team knew it. They had the foresight to say, we can go out, we can be competitive, we can win this. We are not going to be able to execute on time if we do not get our operations in order. Their obstacles definitely will sound familiar, I think, to all of us, and familiar to some of the things I was saying earlier, right? So they were incredibly reliant on spreadsheets. That limited their reporting, it created errors, and it left that leadership team ultimately without any kind of real visibility into what was happening on a day-to-day basis in their operations. Second, their project data was incredibly fragmented. So contractors, field teams, internal teams, they were all working from different versions of what they considered the same truth, and wasn't necessarily as they would pull those things together. And third, they really lacked portfolio-wide visibility, and kind of in two ways. So one, they couldn't see across hundreds of projects at once, right? When you're talking about scale at this level, they had to have that kind of visibility, and they didn't. They wouldn't be able to see across this. But furthermore, they also didn't have the depth that they needed. They couldn't drill down into the details on any one given project. And really, when you think about the growth goals they had ahead of them, when you think about managing global expansion on that kind of foundation, it kind of feels impossible. So it's reasonable to understand where their leadership was coming from. So then the important part, what they did. What they did is really a success pattern that we see, again, across every customer we work with, right? They followed those three simple key principles. They standardized, they centralized, they continue to ongoing optimize. So they they standardized project processes across their team to start. And whether that was internal teams or contractors, so that everyone was working the same way at the end of the day. They centralized their data and their people into one system of record, one system of engagement, one system of intelligence across their entire portfolio, so that they had that 10,000-foot view. They also had the day-to-day task view. And it was all visible in one place. And lastly, they continue to optimize these workflows from reporting to financial tracking, so that the system really ultimately did the heavy lifting for them and not their people spending tens of hours on a weekly basis trying to pull things. The result ultimately speaks for themselves, right? It was faster deployments, faster time to revenue, better forecasting, and the ability to compete and win some of those biggest contracts that were out in the globe and in the market. So really made them a competitive player in the market. Okay, so I'm going to move us on because we only have about 7 minutes left. Next example I want to talk about. So this one comes from one of Europe's largest utilities that at the time was just starting to jump into the EV space. So again, when we talk to customers, one of the biggest challenges, or one of the biggest themes that comes up again and again, timelines, and specifically accelerating timelines. Everyone's trying to move faster. So whether, again, it's EV charging, it could be clean energy, it could be fiber networks, everyone is trying to move faster, but oftentimes they are held back by the very tools that they're trying to use to manage those projects. So this example from a European top utility that was going into EV charging, they again, as many do in these kinds of stories, they had really aggressive growth goals, right? So they were trying to deploy thousands of charge points across Spain and Portugal in just a couple of years. And again, this was their first time going into this. So even though they were a massive utility, you could still consider them a new entrant into this space, right? It was new skills to be gained internally. But their reliance on Excel was slowing them down. They were losing track of inventory, they were losing track of projects. Projects were delayed because no one had an accurate, log of data around milestones that they were trying to hit. And contractors and customers were not getting the timely updates they needed to either understand where things were or when things were going to be going live or when they needed to get additional work done from a contractor standpoint. To make things even worse, the team was spending, their internal team, I should say, was spending tens of hours per PM every single week just consolidating spreadsheets to produce incredibly basic reports for department and utility leadership. That is wild to think for a moment about that fact. So, of course, what do you think happened? They embraced the three-part method, right? They embraced this three-part playbook, and the game ultimately changed for them. Suddenly, every project had standardized milestone management. Some had 75 beautifully detailed key steps, and they were all tracked in one system, right? And this was highly specific to them and the way that they needed to do business. So everyone understood what had to be done, whether they had been there for a long time, or they were new into the business. They had real-time dashboards that replaced manual reporting so that leadership and field teams alike had instant visibility into progress. And inventory and purchase orders were centralized. So teams could show up on site with the right equipment, the right people and expertise to get that job done the first time and avoid costly delays. And by giving contractors and customers transparent updates, those relationships improved, such an improvement that they were noticing out in the community and with their partner teams instead of being strained. So ultimately the impact was really clear, right? Faster time to revenue, less wasted time and effort. What used to take weeks of manual consolidation from that reporting issue that I was mentioning earlier was now available instantly, right? Suddenly they had freed up all of these laborsome administrative tasks to spend time doing other things that are more meaningful to the business and driving it forward. So really broader lesson that we see across this industry and other industries that is if you want to accelerate your timelines, you've got to eliminate the bottlenecks up front, right? You've got to tame that complexity up front. Standardizing your key milestones, centralizing your data, optimizing your reporting. That's how a lot of our customers are moving faster. Okay, so now what? We have 4 minutes. Okay, so what I would say is this. End of last week, I went through and pulled some new headlines. These are things that all of us are seeing, whether you're in EV charging, clean energy, the utility space, you name it, right? Could be in the data center space looking for available power. The proof is in the headlines. The need to act is absolutely urgent. Critical infrastructure investment is booming, and organizations that can move fast will ultimately be the ones that can win. I like to also show this. I think a lot of us are familiar with these types of CEO surveys that get put out by the various big consultancies across the globe. This one just from PricewaterhouseCoopers on their global CEO survey. And ultimately what it says is that nearly 80% of executive leaders across different types of organizations believe that digital transformation is what is going to tame complexity and change how businesses operate and compete in the future. Now, interestingly enough, if you really dig into this, if you work in a highly complex environment like EV charging that has this multi-phase life cycle, that complexity is considered much higher. And this goes up even further with CEOs. It's closer to 90% saying you have to digitally transform the way in which you operate if you are going to be competitive in your space. So when we talk about that data, people, processes, you have to go through digital transformation, get those people working in the same team, standardize the way in which you're doing business, what those workflows look like that are true to your business, and ultimately use that data then to optimize on an ongoing basis. We have certainly seen the proof of this at Sitetracker. If those case studies weren't enough, what I would say is that we're seeing the playbook in action drive results like 41% project portfolio growth, 31% faster timelines to deployment, nearly 80% fewer rework incidents. And these aren't just numbers that were put up here on a marketing slide. These are actual results on average from our customers today. So really compelling results. Oh, and I should mention, because we talked about reporting, saving over 5 hours per week per project manager on reporting to gain true visibility. So pretty awesome. So ultimately the question comes down to, do owners, do operators, do contractors possess the tools to centralize their processes, standardize their processes, centralize data, and really optimize across their entire portfolio? If not, complexity from what we have seen will hold you back, and your competitors are not going to wait. So to wrap this up, in the minute I have left here, invisible risk in EV charging isn't the technology, right? Again, it's complexity. It's the complexity that falls underneath all of those visible symptoms that we're all seeing on a day-to-day basis. But if you have the right playbook, centralize, standardize, optimize, you can turn that risk ultimately into a competitive advantage. If you want to learn more or hear more about how we're supporting other leaders in EV charging, please come and see us. We are in booth V3469. That's level 1 of the Venetian. You can find your way back. We'd love to talk specifics about the challenges that you're facing and talk a little bit more about how we can help. I'm gonna hang back. My time is literally officially up, but I am gonna hang over here for maybe 5 minutes or so. If anyone has questions, I am happy to chat more, happy to talk more. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate the time to be back on the RE Plus stage, everyone. Have a great show.